2018, hundreds of yards inside an underwater cave in Mexico, Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone found himself facing a situation that no amount of fighting experience could prepare him for. Donald Cerrone had spent much of his life pursuing danger. Outside the UFC, he raced vehicles, climbed rocks, rode horses, went skydiving, and regularly explored beneath the water. He had earned his cave diving certification while still in high school, and had continued diving for years. This was not an inexperienced tourist entering a cave without training. Donald understood the equipment, the safety procedures, and the consequences of losing control inside an overhead environment. In open water, a diver experiencing trouble can often rise toward the surface. Inside a submerged cave, that option does not exist. Rock replaces the open water above, and reaching safety requires returning through the same tunnels used to enter. Because natural light disappears quickly, cave divers rely on permanent guidelines installed through major sections of a system. Where those permanent lines do not connect, divers deploy temporary reels known as jump lines. Directional markers are placed along them so that even in darkness, a diver can feel which route leads toward the exit. These lines are not simply navigational aids. In zero visibility, they are lifelines. Donald was visiting Cozumel, Mexico, with several friends. For the first few days, the group completed relatively relaxed dives around coral reefs and shipwrecks. Later, Donald and an older diving companion decided to enter the El Aerolito cave system for a much more serious dive. The man had helped teach Donald much of what he knew about diving. Donald trusted his knowledge, but before the two entered the cave, his wife, Lindsay, expressed concern about the partner's physical coordination. His mind remained sharp, but age had begun affecting the speed and precision of his movements. Inside a cave, a small loss of coordination could have severe consequences. Donald had recently become a father. Before leaving, he kissed Lindsay and their 2-month-old son, Danger, and assured them he would return. Still, the warning remained in his mind. As an additional precaution, Donald arranged to carry a third cylinder of air alongside the two he had originally planned to use. Cave divers commonly manage their breathing gas through the rule of thirds: 1/3 for penetration, 1/3 for the return, and 1/3 held in reserve for an emergency. The extra cylinder gave Donald more time. It did not guarantee that he would find the exit. The two men entered the water and began moving into the cave. Their lights revealed submerged limestone walls and channels stretching away through the darkness. As they progressed, they passed through sections already marked by permanent guidelines. Eventually, they reached a point where they needed to connect the main line to another tunnel, using their own jump line. The procedure required controlled movement. The reel had to be secured correctly, the line had to remain tight, and both divers needed to avoid allowing it to wrap around their equipment. During the tie-off, Donald's partner struck the ceiling, his fins began moving erratically, and the loose line wrapped around him. The more he attempted to free himself, the worse the entanglement became. His fins struck the cave floor and threw fine sediment into the water. A dark cloud rose around him, expanding through the confined passage. Within seconds, the clear water began disappearing. Donald moved toward his partner and attempted to release the line. But the man was already losing control. He struck the roof, twisted his body, and continued kicking, causing even more sediment to rise. Donald backed away several feet until he reached clear water. He grabbed the permanent main line and watched the cloud grow in front of him. From that position, Donald still knew where he was. He had hold of the main line, and the passage surrounding him remained visible. He could have protected himself and waited for his partner to emerge. Cave divers are taught not to allow one emergency to claim 2 lives. A rescuer who enters a situation without control can quickly become another victim. But Donald could see his partner spinning inside the dark cloud. The man's light had gone out. Donald could not tell whether he still had his regulator in his mouth, whether he had air, or whether the line had trapped him completely. Donald released the main line and entered the silt to help him. The moment he crossed into the cloud, everything vanished. His partner was no longer visible. The walls disappeared. The guideline disappeared. The beam from his own light reflected off the particles directly in front of his mask, producing nothing more than a glowing haze. Donald attempted to orient himself, but without visual references, his sense of direction collapsed. He no longer knew whether his body was upright, tilted, or upside down. Then his head struck the ceiling. The impact confirmed that he had been moving upward without realizing it. His breathing accelerated as panic began taking control. The faster he breathed, the faster he consumed his supply. His movements also became less precise, increasing the risk of driving himself deeper into the wrong passage. Donald stopped and forced himself to slow down. The illuminated screens on his two dive computers were among the only objects he could see. He checked his depth, time, and remaining pressure. His third cylinder had not yet been opened, but the dive was already moving far outside the plan. He turned off his light to remove the useless glare and began feeling through the water. His partner was gone. Donald felt along the cave walls, searching for either the man or the missing line. But this was a section they had not explored before. He had no clear mental image of its shape and no familiar rock formations to guide him. Before beginning the dive, Donald had taken a compass bearing toward the entrance. The direction was approximately 126 degrees. He aligned himself with that bearing and began swimming. Almost immediately, he struck a wall. He moved lower and encountered another wall. The compass could indicate a general direction, but it could not show the path through a cave that curved, narrowed, rose, and divided into separate tunnels. His control broke again. Donald began swimming and kicking blindly, searching for anything that felt familiar. Eventually, he burst through the edge of the silt cloud and returned to clearer water. The permanent main line was in front of him. He grabbed it, but the discovery did not solve the problem. The section extending deeper into the cave was visible. The direction leading back toward the entrance had been completely obscured by the silt. More importantly, Donald no longer had the temporary jump line connecting the main route to the way out. Approximately 800 yards of submerged cave remained between him and the entrance. The only route he needed to follow disappeared directly into the black cloud. Donald attempted to remember the cave map and the landmarks he had seen while entering. Somewhere inside the cloud, the passage divided. Choosing the wrong opening could send him farther into the system. He entered the silt again and searched by touch. He found one opening, but could not determine whether it was the correct one. He backed out, returned to the main line, and tried another route. During one attempt, he felt himself swimming against a slow current. Donald remembered that the water had been flowing gently when they entered. In his panicked state, he interpreted the resistance as evidence that he was moving the wrong way. He turned around and returned to the main line. Once again, he was surrounded by clear water in the deeper section of the cave, while the route towards safety remained black. He made another attempt. The same cycle repeated. He entered the darkness, lost his orientation, struck the rock, and retreated to the main line. Each attempt consumed more air, and every return made it harder to bring his breathing under control. Images of Lindsay and his infant son began entering his mind. Donald had promised them that he was coming home. Now, alone inside the cave, he understood that keeping that promise depended on finding an invisible passage before his tanks emptied. His gauges indicated that he still had time. At his current depth, Donald estimated that the cylinder he was using could provide approximately another hour. But that estimate depended on controlled breathing. He was hyperventilating. The additional cylinder he had carried because of Lindsay's warning had prevented the situation from becoming immediately fatal, but panic was rapidly erasing that advantage. Donald began considering what would happen when the air stopped. Drowning had always been one of his greatest fears. His buoyancy compensator contained a pocket of air used to control his position in the water. Donald began forming a final plan. After exhausting his cylinders, he would attempt to rebreathe the air trapped inside the device until the remaining oxygen was depleted and he lost consciousness. He also carried a waterproof slate used for writing underwater. For the first time, Donald considered using it to leave a final message to Lindsay in danger. The possibility affected him more deeply than the lack of air. He had entered the cave after promising he would return, and now he was preparing to explain why he had failed. But the thought of writing the message also forced him to confront what he was doing. He was still conscious. He still had air. He had not yet exhausted every possible route. Donald inflated his buoyancy compensator, allowing it to pull him against the cave's ceiling. He rotated his body and began moving along the rock upside down, using his hands to search for features he remembered from the journey inward. Then, one detail returned to him. Near the route they had used, a large crack ran along the ceiling of the cave. Donald believed the crack eventually approached the surface or widened near the entrance. Even without the missing jump line, following it could provide a continuous natural feature through the darkness. He switched off his dive computer's illuminated displays and killed his main light. He wanted complete darkness, so that even the faintest trace of natural light would become visible. Pressed against the ceiling, Donald began searching with his hands. He crawled across the rock, breathing heavily and feeling along every break in the limestone. At first, he found nothing. His air continued falling, and the darkness offered no indication that he was moving in the correct direction. Then, his hand entered a long opening in the ceiling. He had found the crack. Donald followed it through the cave. Gradually, the opening widened. Far ahead, a faint green glow appeared in the water. For the first time since entering the silt, Donald could see evidence of the outside world. He moved toward the light and attempted to force himself through a small opening, but his tanks were too large. His equipment struck the rock, and he became caught beneath the ceiling. Panic returned immediately. He pushed against the opening, struck the stone, and nearly lost control again. But the crack continued beyond it. Rather than exhausting himself trying to force his tanks through a space that was too small, Donald backed away and continued following the feature. The green glow grew brighter. The crack widened, and the rock eventually opened around him. Donald passed through the final section and emerged from the cave. His partner was already outside. During the confusion, the man had recovered the line and followed it out, leaving Donald alone inside the silt. Both men had survived, but they understood that they would never dive together again. Donald contacted Lindsay and told her that the dive had become dangerous, but he was coming home. The physical danger had ended. The psychological effect did not. Donald had survived serious injuries and other close calls before, but those events had happened quickly. Inside El Aerolito, he had remained conscious as he calculated his air, considered the manner of his death, and prepared to leave a message for his child. For months afterward, the image of the silt cloud remained with him. Closing his eyes could return him to the moment when the cave disappeared and he could no longer see his hands. The additional cylinder, his memory of the ceiling crack, and several brief moments of regained control had allowed him to escape. Remove any one of them, and the outcome could have been entirely different. By year 2025, Cassie Ho had spent more than a decade building one of the internet's largest fitness brands. Through blogulates, she had become known to millions of viewers for workout videos, fitness challenges, and an energetic personality. She was also running PopFlex, the activewear company she had transformed into a major online business. From the outside, her life appeared highly controlled. Behind it, Cassie was exhausted. She later explained that operating both companies had left her under intense pressure. She was working constantly, sleeping poorly, and struggling to recognize when she needed to stop. Even before entering the water, she was carrying the effects of that exhaustion with her. Scuba diving offered something completely different. Underwater, there were no product launches, deadlines, or social media demands. Every movement had to slow down. Breathing became deliberate, and attention remained focused on the environment directly in front of her. Cassie had decided to pursue her open water scuba certification as a gift to herself before beginning a second round of IVF. Completing the course meant demonstrating the skills required to remain safe underwater, respond to equipment problems, and rely on a trained partner or instructor during an emergency. On July 4th, 2025, she entered the water for one of the dives needed to complete that certification. The descent took her far below the surface. At approximately 70 feet, the pressure surrounding a diver is more than 3 times what it is at sea level. The surface can still be reached, but it is no longer only a few kicks away. An uncontrolled rush upward can create another emergency, meaning that a diver in trouble must regain access to air and ascend with assistance. Until that moment, the dive had been going well. The underwater scenery surrounded Cassie, and visibility was clear enough for her to watch marine life moving nearby. Then several giant sea bass appeared. The animals were enormous compared with the smaller fish around them. Cassie became completely absorbed in the sight. For several seconds, the stress she had carried into the water disappeared. Then she inhaled. The breath did not arrive. Salt water entered through her mouth instead. Cassie attempted another breath through her regulator, expecting the airflow to return. But she swallowed more water. The exact technical sequence that caused the problem has not been publicly explained. Cassie later referred to mistakes she had made and connected them to her exhaustion, but she did not provide a complete equipment analysis. What is known is that she suddenly found herself unable to obtain breathable air from the regulator while 70 feet underwater. Her body reacted immediately. Breathing underwater requires trust in equipment. Every inhalation confirms that the system is working. Once water replaces air, that confidence can disappear in seconds. Cassie reached for her instructor and grabbed him by the shoulders. Her movements made the emergency clear. The instructor responded by presenting his alternate air source. The backup regulator carried for situations in which another diver cannot use their own supply. But Cassie still could not breathe. Whether water remaining in her mouth, panic, or another part of the emergency prevented her from using it properly was not specified. To Cassie, it felt as though nothing was working. Her lungs began contracting with the need to inhale. She was surrounded by water, unable to speak and unable to explain precisely what was happening. The regulator that should have kept her alive had delivered water, and the replacement had not immediately restored her breathing. Panic began overwhelming her training. Her focus narrowed. The sea bass, the scenery, and the rest of the dive disappeared from her awareness. There was only the desperate physical need for air. Tears began forming behind her mask. Cassie started thinking about the possibility that she was experiencing the final moments of her life. She had not prepared a goodbye for her husband, or resolved everything she wanted to with her parents. A day she had intended to remember, as the completion of a personal challenge, was becoming the moment her family might lose her. But her instructor had not lost control. He remained with her, took charge of the emergency, and began bringing her upward. Cassie later described the experience as feeling far longer than it probably lasted. When someone cannot breathe, a few seconds can feel stretched into an impossible amount of time. The water above them gradually became brighter. The distance to the surface decreased. Eventually, Cassie was brought out of the water alive. The immediate danger had ended, but she was shaken by how quickly the dive had changed. There had been no long warning period. She had moved from calmly watching fish to believing she might drown within the space of a few breaths. Afterward, Cassie examined what had happened. She connected the incident to the condition in which she had entered the water. Months of pressure, overwork, and sleep deprivation had affected her concentration. She believed that exhaustion had contributed to the mistake that placed her in danger. For many people, the experience would have ended their interest in diving permanently. Cassie made a different decision. She returned to the water. 2 days after nearly drowning, she completed the remaining requirements and received her open water certification. Returning so quickly was not an attempt to pretend the incident had never happened. She wanted to understand her mistakes and prevent the fear from controlling what she did next. Later in 2025, she continued training and earned an advanced diving certification. She eventually returned to the same underwater location where the emergency had occurred. This time, she completed the dive without losing control, reclaiming a place that had become associated with the moment she believed her life was ending. But surviving the incident did not simply return Cassie to the person she had been before it. For months, she thought about the speed with which everything had nearly been taken from her. She began separating her life into 2 periods: the person she had been before the near drowning, and the person who emerged afterward. The accident forced her to confront a pattern that had existed long before she entered the ocean. She had built her career by pushing harder, working longer, and refusing to feel satisfied. That mentality had helped create her success, but it had also left her exhausted enough to make a serious mistake in an environment where a small error could become fatal. At 70 feet beneath the surface, none of the company's deadlines or achievements could provide the one thing she needed: a single breath. Cassie Ho survived because her instructor was close, recognized the emergency, and brought her safely upward. She later continued diving, but she carried a different understanding of what had happened. The dive had started as a gift before another difficult chapter of her life. Instead, it became a warning. For several terrifying moments beneath the ocean, one of the internet's most recognizable fitness creators was no longer thinking about success, work, or what she had not yet achieved. She was fighting only to reach the surface and breathe again.